Dust settled thick in the throat of the West, a fine powder that coated every breath, every memory. They called it the Devil's Bed, this stretch of land where a man could lose his soul to the sun and his bones to the wind. It was here in a cabin splintered by the endless cold that a lone wolf named Jonas Hail had made his peace with silence. His life was a slow and measured ballad of sorrow, the ache of a war wound in his knee, the dull throb of a grief so old it had become a part of him. But the night a blizzard tore through the flats, an unexpected note was struck, a jarring chord that would shatter his solitude forever. The wind howled like a hungry spirit, clawing at the pine logs of his cabin. Inside the fire was a ghost of a flame, and the darkness had settled deep. Jonas woke with a rifleman's instinct, his hand reaching for the cold steel of his Henry. He was a man who slept with one eye open, but this was different. The cabin was warmer than it should have been. A soft, flickering light danced on the far wall. His blood ran cold. He eased himself from the cot, the old wood groaning a protest he ignored. The figure was small and crouched low by the hearth, wrapped in the heavy wool blanket he kept there. A woman, a sliver of moonlight from a high crack in the roof, caught the sheen of her wet hair stuck to her shoulders like river reeds. She was barefoot, her skin pale and gleaming either with melted snow or a fever of exhaustion. He saw her chest rise and fall in a slow, tired rhythm, the neckline of her deerskin dress torn, revealing the curve of a high, firm breast. She was a trespasser, a ghost, a fever dream born of the cold. His hand finally gripped the rifle, the cold metal, a familiar weight. He moved silently, his limp a well-practiced grace. The woman didn't stir. He watched her for a long, tense moment. He saw the way she held her hands to the flame, as if she didn't believe in its warmth, the hollows of her cheeks, the crumbs clinging to the corner of her mouth. She was more animal than woman, driven by a primal need to survive. He leaned forward, the cot creaking under his weight, a sound too loud in the sudden silence. She turned, her eyes as dark and deep as a desert well flickered from his face to the rifle in his hand. They held his gaze, not with fear, but with a weary resignation that pierced him deeper than any bullet. "I thought the place was empty," she said, her voice a dry rasp. He didn't answer. He stood his good leg, taking the weight, the other dragging just a little. He moved to the small table by the stove, picked up the kettle. It was still warm. She had lit the fire, taken his blanket, and eaten his bread. She was a thief, a liar, a stranger. He poured the leftover water into a tin mug, the steam rising in the dim light like a silent prayer. He set it down, the clink of metal on wood echoing in the small room. "You want to sit at the table like a person?" he asked. She rose slowly, the blanket clutched tight around her, her body stiff. She limped slightly as she crossed the floor. She wasn't scared. She was beyond it. Scared would come later. She sat, pulling the blanket tight, her dark eyes still fixed on him. "I saw the chimney smoke," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "Waited hours, didn't see no one. I thought." She trailed off, searching for a word. "You have a name?" he asked, his voice low and flat as the horizon. "Alina," she said. He nodded, a single sharp motion. "Jonas." They fell into a silence that was heavier than the blizzard outside. He looked at the trail of melted snow she had left on his floor. She must have been a shadow watching his cabin for hours, a starving wraith waiting for a chance at life. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "North. Walked." She swallowed, her hands shaking slightly as she lifted the mug. "My people scattered. After the raids, some went to Indian territory, some didn't make it. I stayed with a man for a time. Then he didn't want me anymore. Said I was too much trouble." Jonas didn't ask what kind of trouble. He'd seen the cruelty men could inflict on a body, the kind of trouble that leaves bruises long after the fists are gone. Her skin was dry, chapped, faint cuts and yellowing bruises on her legs. She was a story written in hurt. She set the mug down, and her eyes met his again. "I can cook," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, a simple statement of fact. "I can patch clothes, cut wood. I can warm your bed if you want. I can bear children. I'm strong." There was no seduction, no plea for pity, just a direct, brutal bargain. "Just don't send me back out there." Jonas let out a slow, deliberate breath. He walked to the fire, picked up the second blanket, and held it out to her. Her eyes widened, the dark pools of them reflecting the flames. "You sleep near the fire," he said, his voice as rough as his hands. "You're not going back out there, but you're not getting in my bed either." Her lip trembled just once before a flicker of relief bloomed behind her eyes. She took the blanket, wrapped it around herself, and knelt where she had been before. She looked smaller that way, but steadier. As she lay down, her eyes stayed on him. Jonas went to his cot, sat on the edge, the ache in his leg, a steady drum. He didn't look at her, just stared at the floor. This wasn't how he wanted his night to go, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him more than the cold that if he'd sent her out, he'd have seen her eyes all night begging and dying. She hadn't begged. He'd seen what it looked like when someone gave up. This woman hadn't. He laid down the rifle within reach, not because he feared her, but because he didn't know how to stop guarding his broken heart. She curled under the blankets, her breathing slowing. And Jonas lay awake listening to the new sound in his lonely cabin. The morning came with a muted gray light. Jonas woke to the sound of the fire already burning. The faint smell of coffee hung in the air. Alina sat at the table, her dark hair brushed out with his old comb. He saw the fresh bandage on her foot, a stark white against her pale skin. He didn't ask. He sat down, and she poured him coffee without a word. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was cautious, a fragile truce. "That dress needs mending more than my shirts do," he finally said, breaking the quiet. She looked up at him over the rim of her mug. "You have a spare shirt I can use." He nodded, stood, and pulled a clean older shirt from a crate. He tossed it onto the table. "Cut it if you have to." Alina took the shirt, her thumb tracing the collar. She stood, and for the first time she turned her back on him, letting the blanket drop. He heard the soft rustle of deerskin, the quiet rustle of fabric. He turned to the window, watching the frost-covered pane, but his mind was on her. He heard a faint gasp as the damp fabric pulled a healing bruise. He didn't turn until he heard the sound of his own shirt being pulled over her head. When he did, she was rolling up the sleeves. The shirt hung loose, a soft drape over the curves of her body. It wasn't proper, not by any town standards, but it was warm, and it was his. She caught him looking, her eyes steady. Neither of them said a word. She folded her dress, neatly set it near the fire to dry, then picked up the needle and thread again. Her hands, he noticed, no longer shook. They moved with a quiet confidence, as if she belonged. He leaned against the wall. "That trapper you mentioned," he said, his voice flat. "He hurt you?" She paused. "Number, but he would have. He was waiting for me to be too weak to say no." She looked up. The one before him. "Apprentice. He called me his woman in front of others. But in private I was something else, quiet and useful. When I asked to leave, he said he'd sell me for a blanket and a tin of beans. I guess I wasn't worth more." Jonas's jaw clenched. He looked at his own hands, the scarred knuckles. He wasn't a man for talking, but something in her story demanded a response. "You're worth more," he said. Why, she asked, a challenge in her dark eyes. "Because you're still standing," he said. They worked in a shared silence for the rest of the day. Alina cleaned the cabin, her quiet movements filling the space. She found a faded photograph, a woman with kind eyes and a swaddled baby tucked away in a drawer. She didn't ask who they were, but she placed it back carefully, exactly as she had found it. That night she sat by the fire. Her hair combed her skin, smelling of pine soap. Jonas watched her from his chair, sipping from his cup. "You scared me that first night," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She looked over, surprised. "I did. Didn't expect to find someone inside my walls. Thought maybe I'd gone soft." "You haven't," she said. "You look different now," he said, watching her carefully. "Cleaner?" she asked, a flicker of something in her eyes. "No," he said. "Like you expect to wake up tomorrow." The words hung in the air. The silence stretched. "I do," she finally said. She went to lay the blankets out, but this time she paused. She turned to him. "You said the rest is my choice." He met her eyes. "Tonight I'll stay near the fire," she said. "But maybe not always." Jonas didn't answer. He just nodded and stood to fetch another log. And for the first time since his wife had gone, he didn't feel the suffocating weight of being alone. The storm sealed them in. The wind pressed harder against the walls, and snow piled against the window panes. Inside, everything was quiet, but nothing was still. Alina moved differently now, not cautious, just settled. She swept the floor, the soft shuffle of her wrapped foot, a new part of the cabin's rhythm. The shirt she wore cinched at the waist with a strip of leather fit her better. Jonas, sharpening his knife by the window, found his attention wandering. She bent to pick up a pot, the tail of the shirt lifting, showing the firm curve of a thigh. He looked away too late. Her eyes met his direct, neither shy nor flirtatious. A shared knowledge passed between them in that silent glance, a spark that caught and held. That night after supper, she sat by the fire combing her hair. The heat painted her in golden shadows. Jonas watched her, his hand resting on his knee. "You were married," once she said suddenly. He nodded. "Long time ago." "What happened?" "Fever took her. A winter like this one. And the baby." He glanced at the fire, his jaw shifting. "Lived 6 days." She was quiet for a long time. "You built all this yourself?" "Every plank. Wasn't meant to be for one person." He looked at her now. She didn't look away. "Didn't think I could want again," he said. "Not in that way." Her voice was quiet, a low murmur. "And now?" Jonas stood slowly, a slight limp. He knelt by the fire and added another log. The flames jumped higher. He stayed there, crouched low, elbows on his knees. "I don't know what to do with someone like you," he said. "What does that mean?" "You're here, but I don't own you. You offer yourself, but not for pity. You work like it's your place, but you haven't asked to stay." Alina leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "Because I was waiting to see if you wanted me to." He looked at her again, closer now. Her face was soft with the heat, her eyes steady. He reached out, brushed his fingers across her jaw, just once. She leaned into the touch, a faint shudder of instinct. His hand dropped. "I don't want to touch you just because I can," he said, his voice not wavering. "Then, don't touch me unless you need to." Jonas's fingers flexed at his side. His body, a silent argument between heat and hesitation. "You keep saying you'll stay," he said. "But what are you staying for?" Alina shifted forward, her knees touching his. "You gave me warmth when I didn't earn it. You fed me without asking what I'd give back. You told me I was worth something." She paused. "That's more than any man's ever done." He nodded. "That's not love." "No," she said. "But it's closer than the fire." They sat there too close for silence to feel safe. Then Jonas stood backing away from the undeniable pull. He turned to the cot. "You take the bed tonight," he said without looking at her. "I'll stay near the fire." She stood slowly, unsure. "It's warm, and it's yours now. You need real sleep." She nodded. "All right." That night she lay in his bed, inhaling the scent of pine smoke and man. Jonas sat by the fire, sharpening a second blade, the wet stone never once touching steel. His hands just rested there still. Neither of them slept early, and both of them silently began to think in terms of we. The cold didn't break. Inside, the routine between them became a rhythm familiar and comfortable. They didn't talk about their growing connection, but it was in the way she knew what he needed before he asked, in the way his hand found her back when she bent over the fire. On the 5th night, it was colder than the rest. The wind howled louder. Jonas came in from breaking ice at the trough, his hands stiff and red, his beard rimmed with frost. Alina moved quickly. She pulled off his coat, wrapped a cloth around his frozen fingers. "You shouldn't have gone out alone. They'd have died otherwise." "You could have died too." He just stood there, breathing hard. She knelt in front of him, unbuckled his boots, pulled them off with care, and replaced his wet socks with a dry pair. She rubbed his hands between hers, her touch steady, firm. It wasn't gentle, but it was intimate. He watched her. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "You didn't have to save me either." Jonas let out a slow breath. "I wasn't trying to be kind. I just couldn't stand the thought of someone freezing that close to my door." Her eyes flickered up to him. "Maybe it doesn't matter why you did it." He didn't answer, but his hands didn't pull away. Later, they sat together on the floor near the fire, a blanket draped over both of them. Alina wore the leggings he'd found for her in the trunk and his old shirt. Her hand rested lightly on his. He turned his palm upward and held her hand. They sat like that for a long time. "That picture I found," she said. "The woman and the baby. That was your wife, Sarah, and Daniel. They were." "Did you ever think about starting again?" she asked, her voice low. "I used to think I couldn't," he said. "That I didn't deserve to." He looked at her, his eyes sharp. "Now, I don't know what I deserve, but I know what I want." She didn't speak, just leaned forward, giving him every chance to back away. He didn't. Their lips met, soft at first, then deeper. He pulled her closer, his hands sliding to her waist, feeling the firmness of her body beneath the soft cloth. Her fingers touched his face, brushed the scar that ran along his temple. It wasn't hurried. It was the first touch that meant something. When they finally broke apart, they didn't say anything, just breathed. That night, she didn't ask permission. She rose from the fire and walked to the bed. She paused, looked back. He followed. And for the first time in years, Jonas Hail didn't sleep alone. He wasn't waiting for silence anymore. He was waiting for her breath against his neck. The sun didn't rise, just a dull gray light that slipped between the frosted window panes. Jonas woke first, his arm still resting over her waist. Alina lay curled against him, her head tucked under his jaw, her hair dark against the white pillow. He stared at the ceiling, feeling settled like she belonged there. He didn't move for a long time. Then he shifted, and she murmured in her sleep, but didn't wake. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulled on his long shirt, and limped quietly to the stove. The fire had burned low. He added 2 logs, then stood rubbing the stiffness from his bad leg. She stirred, sat up, and kept the blanket wrapped around her. "Did I snore?" she asked. He smirked faintly without turning. "No worse than me." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I didn't think I'd sleep that well again." "You needed it." She stood still, wrapped in the covers, and came barefoot to the fire. He looked at her, at the small scar on her thigh, at the shape of her body under the blanket. He handed her a shirt from the chair, one of his better ones. "Is this a sign of something?" she asked quietly. He shrugged. "It's a shirt I'd give someone if I wanted them to stay." Her expression softened. "Then I'll wear it." As she dressed, Jonas splashed his face with hot water. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, older, a gray beard, but his eyes weren't hollow anymore. He turned when she stepped out. The shirt hung just right on her sleeves, rolled hair tied loosely with a strip of leather. She looked like someone who had been there for months. "Do people come here?" she asked over their silent meal. "Not in winter. Sometimes a trader comes spring." "Would they care that I'm here?" "They'd look twice," he said. "Maybe talk behind their hands." "Because I'm Kiowa." He nodded. "Because I'm in your bed." He nodded again. "Would you lie about me?" "No," he said firmly. "Not once." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'll stay." Later, they worked together, patching a loose board on the barn wall. Alina held the nails he hammered. When the hammer slipped and hit his thumb, he cursed and she smirked. "You talk more now," she said. "Used to talk too much when I drank," he replied. "Now I've got a better reason." She laughed, a full, unguarded sound that settled somewhere deep in him. That night she didn't ask permission. She took his hand, pulled him to the cot, and they lay skin to skin under the heavy quilt. No vows, no promises, just staying. And that was enough. The storm season finally broke. Late February brought a thaw. The land once buried began to breathe again. Jonas noticed the change first in the cattle, their restlessness. Alina watched him from the porch, his rifle slung across his back, his broad frame, a stark silhouette against the pale light. She no longer stayed inside. She followed him, held buckets, steadied fence posts, her movements in sync with his. The silence of winter had protected them. Spring would not. That morning, as she spread a blanket to dry, Alina turned to him. "When your people see me, they'll ask questions." He sat at the table, sharpening a chisel. He met her eyes. "They'll ask. And if they don't like the answers, they'll have to live with them." She studied him, then nodded. Later, as they carried feed to the barn, she spoke again, her voice quiet. "There's something I haven't told you." He looked over. "When I left apprentice," she said, her fingers tightening on a post, "I thought I might already be carrying. It didn't hold. My body bled out." Jonas stood still. "I thought it meant I couldn't anymore," she said, her voice a whisper. "That no man would want a woman who failed." He set the pail down, stepped closer. His hand rested on her cheek, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. "You didn't fail," he said. "You survived." Her eyes shone not with tears, but with a hard-won truth. She nodded, short and sharp, as if his words had finally settled something deep inside. That night she laid his hand low over her stomach. "If I do carry again," she whispered, "I want it to be yours." Jonas's grip tightened gently, steadily. "Then it will be." They kissed slower this time. No rush, just certainty. His hand slid along her back, pulling her close. The quilt slipped from her shoulders, and they lay together. The closeness wasn't born of fear. It was chosen. Both of them staying. Both of them giving. Both of them ready for what came next. By the time the fire burned low, Alina was asleep, her breath steady against his chest. Jonas lay awake a little longer, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for the silence to swallow him. He was waiting for the sound of another heartbeat. By March, wagon tracks began to cut through the flats. Birds returned and smoke from distant homesteads marked the horizon. The world was stirring after winter, and with it came the proof that they couldn't stay hidden forever. Jonas knew it when he saw the trader from Sable Ridge. He stepped outside to meet him, while Alina stood just inside the door, her arms folded. She didn't hide. She wore Jonas's shirt, her braid hanging over one shoulder, and she met the man's stare without flinching. "Didn't know you had company, Hail," the trader said. "I do now," Jonas replied flatly. The trader's eyes narrowed. "Kiowa." Jonas's eyes narrowed. "She's Alina. That's all you need to know." The trader smirked but didn't press. He made his sail and left before dusk. Jonas watched him disappear. When he stepped back inside, Alina was by the fire. "They'll talk," she said. "Let them," Jonas answered. That night they sat on the cot. Alina shifted his hand, placing it low over her stomach. "I was late," she whispered. He studied her face, not sure he'd heard right. She gave a small, firm nod. "I think I carry yours." The weight of her words settled into him slowly. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with a kind of heavy certainty. His hand stayed against her stomach. "Then this is your home," he said, his voice low and steady. "Yours and the child's." Her lips parted, and for the first time, he saw her fight the edge of tears. She pressed her forehead against his, her breath shaking. "I thought I would never belong anywhere again." "You belong here," he said. "With me." Weeks passed. The land grew warmer. The cattle-calf streams ran fuller. Alina's body began to change. Jonas worked longer, cutting more wood, setting more traps, preparing. One morning as the sun finally broke through, he saddled his horse. Alina came to the door. "You're going to town," she said. He nodded. "They'll stare at me." "They'll stare at me too," he replied. "You mean to tell them?" "No," he said. "I mean to show them." And so he did. In town, heads turned. Men muttered. Women whispered. But Jonas walked with Alina at his side, his hand resting firm on her back. When a man spat near the trough, Jonas turned and met his eyes until he looked away. Alina held her head high, her braid hanging down her figure, showing the faintest swell of new life. By the time they returned home, the message was clear. She was his and he was hers. That evening, they sat on the porch. The land stretched quiet and endless before them. The sky burned orange over the hills. Alina leaned against him, her hand resting over her stomach. Jonas's arm wrapped around her shoulders. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. "Neither are you," he said. They stayed that way until the light faded the fire inside, waiting the sound of cattle settling in the distance. Jonas Hail, who once thought silence would be his last companion, had a woman beside him, a child on the way, and a home no longer built for one. And for the first time in years, he was ready to live.